So, one of the things I wanted to share with everyone this afternoon is some new research that I've been doing on the history of the football poster, the World Cup poster particularly. You probably all know that the World Cup developed actually out of Olympic football competitions, particularly with the success of Uruguay in 1924 and 1928. There really was demonstrated to be a huge market for football at the Olympic Games. However, not many people think of football as part of our high cultural history, because we have this general sense of it being the people's game. And so, you know, the work of the likes of Steve Redhead, Post-Fandom and the Millennial Blues, when he talks about the literaturisation of football, with Nick Hornby being as recent as 1992. It's a chronology that I absolutely refute. If you look at the likes of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and serious popular writers of their time, particularly Conan Doyle's circle at the turn of the century, they were as much interested in football as they were the politics of their day. And so this kind of comes out of my interest in cultural history, pushing back the kind of chronology of when football was an aesthetic art as much as it was a popular entertainment of the people, and thinking about this idea of the people's game. In what sense do the football posters show football as the people's game, and in what sense do they show it to be part of a broader kind of cultural aesthetic? You probably know that the Olympic Games were always thought of as a cultural festival. Right until 1948, there were competitions in painting, sculpture, architecture, and other kind of aesthetic elements. So not everybody thinks of football in the same way. And this new work is designed to address some of those gaps. So thinking particularly, I'm not going to go through every World Cup poster because I just don't have time, but I'm thinking about the contrast between Brazil in 1950, the first time that Brazil hosted the Football World Cup, and 2014. And you only have to look at the two posters side by side that you can see the marketing differences that have developed. So this is a key element. FIFA are very pleased when they thought of this. They call this the art mark. So it's a kind of representation of the Jules Rimet trophy that is now depicted on every World Cup poster. Clearly not there then, and also you can see the kind of aesthetic differences. Working with some colleagues in Brazil, I'm a monolinguist, I'm afraid. So I've been working with some colleagues in Brazil, and we've looked at how that first image actually came around. And talking about the people's game, there was a competition announced in 1949 to design the official poster. There were 114 entrants and 4 finalists, and these are some of the finalists. This is what the 1950 World Cup poster could have looked like. Now, the entrants came from all over Brazil. And they represented local, regional and national identities within the entries, and this is something that starts to kind of nuance the picture. The actual guy who won it is not very famous. His name was J. Ney Damasceno, and he came from Rio de Janeiro, and he won 37,000 cruzeiros for his troubles, and then he seems to disappear. So you can see that this is pretty much ongoing work. It doesn't seem to have changed his life. He wasn't an established artist. He won a competition. And this is part of the history of the World Cups. In contrast, you'll probably all know that the 82 poster was by Juan Miro, who was already a respected international artist. And you'll know the significance of the 1966 World Cup posters, but one of the reasons I wanted to talk about them very briefly today is as an example of the first social media. And for saying that the FA are in many ways one of the most reactionary sporting bodies perhaps in the world, maybe outside FIFA, I don't know. But one of the things that they did was revolutionary, was to have the first World Cup mascot. People around here can name him for me. and you know that he was designed by the people, Walter Tuckwell and Associates, who had the license to print merchandise for Doctor Who, Noddy, and a lot of the Warner Brothers cartoons. So in effect, World Cup Willie changes the World Cup because it domesticates the audience. It's no longer aimed at the people in the stadium, it's aimed at the family audience at home, particularly to children. There are 100,000 of these posters printed all over the UK, especially outside transport venues, the police, and so forth. And one of the things that a little mascot like this did was, even if your English was not great and you're a foreign visitor, you could recognise that this was trying to tell you something about the World Cup and get information. It was the main form of publicity in 1966, which is kind of shocking to think about, the way that England hosted this World Cup almost on a shoestring. So we start every year since 66 to get a mascot, a poster, and then as things develop, and you can see it by 82, you start to get a trademark, which becomes at a later point the art mark. We might debate, the historian Tony Mason has debated when was the first proper World Cup. Certainly not 1930, 1934, 1938, mainly a kind of Eurocentric tournament with some South American teams. Tony Mason thinks that the first World Cup was probably 82 or 86. We might also debate, when did World Cups start to embrace popular culture? And is that before the Olympic Games or after? I think with World Cup Willie we can start to say that it's probably slightly before the mass popularisation of the Olympic Games through popular culture. But certainly by 1994 you've got the German-born artist Peter Max, well known for his kind of very vibrant style, designing what was to that point the most commercialised World Cup in history. Beginning to draw it to a close, and yet we still have examples. People celebrate 98 as a very kind of diverse and inclusive World Cup, but we still have examples of the public designing posters. This was designed by a young French woman, Nathalie Legal, who was an art student and didn't particularly like football or go to football. One of the things I want to just draw your attention to in starting to draw to a conclusion is think about how the images have changed. We're now looking down. It kind of symbolises the mediatisation and the globalisation of World Cups, because it's about the satellite audiences being drawn in rather than the single boot image that you sometimes have. So it's ongoing work. Any of you who went to the Hofstra conference a couple of years back, I've got a chapter coming out in the edited collection from that, but some of us who have been writing on sport and art and football and art have also got an edited collection coming out with Daniel Haxall. So it'll be going into there, but the next stage is to look at each World Cup in more detail, particularly since 1982 in Spain, and looking at the regional posters that were produced and how the poster from Catalonia was very different than the poster from Milan, and therefore how regional identities are explored, and also why FIFA still want a poster. What does it do? How does it legitimate their contest to have a World Cup poster in a world where the information is easily accessible on many different platforms? So you don't actually need World Cup posters anymore. They are, if you like, redundant. So thank you for listening to me. That's my session. There's just going to be a slight technical glitch while we hand over the microphones. So if you could just talk amongst yourselves for a minute, and I'll introduce the next speaker. Thank you.